Good morning. Welcome to Bellevue Christian Church, where we are a church of ordinary people learning to live everyday life like Jesus, all because of what Jesus has done for us. You may notice that we're back here in the church building. Been here for week 2 now. I just want to say thanks to a dedicated group of people who've had a lot of volunteers help install cameras, run lines, upgrade the internet, just so we could bring this experience to you. I see it as we're bringing the church building to the church. And while we are scattered as the church, we're kind of bringing a sense of normalcy, hopefully, back to you. And in the long term, we'd like to see this continue where we will be live streaming services. So if you're at home with a sick kid, if you're not ready to come back when restrictions lift, this will still be available for you. So you'll see us here in the church building week after week from this point forward. And just want to thank all kinds of volunteers that have helped out. And if you feel like things have been stagnant as we've been separated, I just want to encourage you that I've watched VBS come together from all over the place. There are so many volunteers involved getting VBS together. The church is alive and well. If you want to be involved in something like this, if you are new here, you can go to bellevuechristian.church/new, and we can get you involved in all of this. If you need some prayer, we have a prayer team that's ready and willing to pray with you. You could go to bellevuechristian.church/prayer, and they can connect with you right away. We have an exciting morning lineup for you. We have a guest speaker in Josh Pay, and he's going to step in while Austin is out on baby watch. So as we move into our time of worship, I read this devotional last night with my wife, and it said, God honors faith, and faith honors God. I'm just going to repeat that. It says, God honors faith, and faith honors God. So in a time when things seem uncertain and hard, we are challenged and reminded to keep our faith on Him, keep our faith in Him. So this morning, this first song is going to be Thou My Vision, and I just like us to treat it as a prayer. So Lord, I just pray that you be our vision. I pray that you be our guide. I pray that you be our wisdom. Lord, just instill your spirit in us. Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart. Not be all else to me, save that thou art. Thou my best thought by day or by night, waking or sleeping, thy presence my life.
Be thou my wisdom, be thou my true word. I ever with thee, and thou with me, Lord. Thou my great Father, and thy true Son. Thou in me dwelling, and I with thee one.
Riches I need not, nor man's empty praise. Thou mine inheritance, now and always. Thou and thou only be first in my heart. High King of heaven, my treasure thou art. High King of heaven, be my vision, oh ruler of all.
Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul. I worship Your holy name. The sun comes up, it's a new day dawning. It's time to sing your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever lies before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul. I worship Your holy name. Rich in love and You're slow to anger. Your name is great and Your heart is kind. For all Your goodness I will keep on singing. 10,000 reasons for my heart to find. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul. I worship Your holy name. And on that day when my strength is failing, the end draws near and my time has come. Still my soul will sing Your praise unending. 10,000 years and then forevermore. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul. I worship Your holy name. I worship Your holy name. Oh, Lord, I worship Your holy name.
Amen. We're going to welcome Josh Pay to the stage this morning, and he's going to give us a message.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to be able to join the Bellevue Church family this morning. So many of us spread out, so many different places all over the city of Pittsburgh, coming together as one church, regardless of how this season of disruption may cause things to be different. It's just so good to know that we can still be together as the people of God, as the local church, together on Sunday mornings because of the gift of technology experiences like we're taking in this morning from our homes. And it is just really my honor to be able to join with us this weekend. As was mentioned, Austin and Julie a moment ago, I had a chance to talk to Austin. Still no baby, but who knows? We're like a couple days delayed here. Baby could be on the way even already right now. And certainly when the baby comes, we will celebrate with Austin and Julie this great, amazing gift that has now joined their family and this family here at Bellevue Christian Church as well. And, Austin and I have had a chance to become friends over the last few months. Our family relocated from just west of Chicago, Rockford, Illinois, where I had the opportunity to serve as a pastor for about 10 years, to right here in Pittsburgh. And my wife, Pilar, I think we got a picture here we can show, meet my family here. My wife, Pilar, and our daughter, Abigail, and our son, Andrew, are just delighted to be able to call Pittsburgh home. My wife grew up in Wexford, kind of in the northern part of the city, and we've been able to come back, have 3 generations under one roof right now. We relocated back to town, and then COVID happened, and so we've all just kind of enjoyed being together, trying to figure out this season, and it has been our joy to be able to join with my mother and father-in-law and be with them during this kind of really bizarre time of life as well. And, as I mentioned, Austin and I love getting together from time to time and just being able to support each other and encourage each other. We meet just down the road here at Joe's Rusty Nail sometimes. I know a whole bunch of you have been to Joe's Rusty Nail before, or what I think is probably the best taco in the city of Pittsburgh at 202 Hometown Taco. Y'all had a chance to have one of these tacos yet? Oh my goodness, they're delicious. As soon as we can get back in restaurants together again, I can't wait to be with Austin and for us to be able to share a meal and community once more. As I mentioned, our family relocated from Rockford, Illinois, just south of Wisconsin. And a few years back, our family spent some time vacationing in the northern part of that state. And one particular afternoon, we made our way to a little logging museum that told the story of some of the ruggedly independent group of people who cleared the land and pioneered the North Woods and the western prairies of the United States. And as I worked my way through the museum that day, I peered into the pictures, the weathered faces of homesteaders and camp owners and canteen cooks. And I just couldn't help but be inspired by their courage and their sacrifice. Many of them left the security of their homes to plot a new course in a new world. And among the many families who took this challenge was Olas and Sina Ramsos, my wife Pilar's great-great-grandparents. See, in the late 1800s, they immigrated alone from Norway to Cameron, Wisconsin, where Olas acquired 200 acres of property and then sent for his family to start the back-breaking work of clearing the land. Like many of those early settlers, Olas marked his claim with walls and fences. And like many of those early settlers, all these new language started to appear on the scene, like independence and private property and keep out and no trespassing. They taught these things to their kids so they would grow up to be rugged individualists who were self-reliant in every way. These were the days of David Thoreau. And in those early days, those Western expansion homesteaders like Olas made a curious decision. They tended to build their homes in the middle of their homestead where they could look out and survey all of their land. And Olas and his contemporaries were going to prove that they could do life not needing anybody else. But as time passed, they discovered that there was something missing from their lives. They discovered that living lonely, separated, unconnected, isolated lives wasn't what it was all cracked up to be. Life was difficult. Making it on your own was hard, especially through the cold winters of fighting off disease and the hot, dry summers. And so they learned a very significant lesson, that they had a much better chance of surviving the challenges of life if they built their houses not in the center of their homestead, but sort of clustered together up in the four corners, nearest to their neighbors. They discovered that human flourishing comes through the shared experience of being connected to one another. Let me share that again. Human flourishing comes through the shared experience of being connected to one another. But living into that value came as a real shift in culture. See, in order to achieve that, they'd have to do a few things. They'd have to start to loosen their grip on their independence. They'd have to be willing to share their possessions and their resources when they saw that they had a neighbor who was in need. They'd have to take time and listen and notice and care about others in their world. And they'd have to learn how to be open to being the recipients of all of those things themselves. See, these were not the natural disciplines of the fiercely independent and self-reliant culture of the new American West. And surrendering to these new values would take patient and intentional effort. But as they did, they discovered that getting through a winter or getting through a difficult time or getting through an illness was much easier if you could just sort of do it together. That flourishing comes through the shared experience of being connected to one another. Now, I know you've been studying the book of Proverbs together for the last few weeks, this beautiful, beautiful book of wisdom. These pithy statements that are written from a father to his son. King Rehoboam, or King Solomon, I should say, passing along words of encouragement and warning and correction and love to his son, Rehoboam. See, Solomon had the experience of being able to take in all that life could offer, all of life in its highest of highs and its lowest of lows. He had led both in strength and through moments of weakness. And so he deeply desires for his son to experience this human flourishing in his life too. And so he sits down to share these timeless truths so that his son may repeat his victories and may avoid his defeats. I imagine that it's in this spirit that Solomon sat down with his thoughts and penned this advice for his son. Proverbs 11:14, he says, "For lack of guidance, a nation falls, but victory is won through many advisors." Eugene Peterson was a pastor and a theologian, and he translated the Old and the New Testaments in a version of the Bible that he called The Message. I just love the way that Eugene Peterson captures this same proverb. He says it this way. He says, "Without good direction, people lose their way. But the more wise counsel you follow, the better your chances." Rehoboam was raised in the luxury of the king's palace in Jerusalem, never wanting for anything. From the moment that he was born, every single one of his needs was tended to. He lived his entire life in the safety and the comfort, in the sheltered predictability and privilege of the king's castle. And you might think of him as someone who spent his life in that isolated middle. But now his father, Solomon, has died. And at age 41, he is the rightful successor to his father's throne, thrust into leadership with really big shoes to fill. And so when we meet him in 1 Kings chapter 12, Rehoboam is ascending a mountain in Shechem to be coronated as king, just north of Jerusalem there. And he was standing in the same spot where the patriarch Abraham stood when God promised his offspring would become a great nation. Standing in the same spot where his grandfather David stood, a shepherd turned king, scrappy and resourceful, described as a man who was after God's own heart. Standing in the very same spot that his father stood. Solomon, regarded as the wisest man who ever lived, an entrepreneurial builder who put Israel on the map, became the center of wealth and privilege. And now this mantle of leadership is being placed upon Rehoboam's shoulders. And there's a question that's lingering heavy in the air that day. How will he lead? from the isolated middle or the dependent corner of connection? Will he experience human flourishing, or, in his Father's words, will he lose his way? At this moment in history, life outside the palace gates does not afford the same comforts as the king. Solomon had built a grand city in Jerusalem, and someone had to pay the bill. As a result, the people have been living under the heavy burden of taxation for decades. And so with the coronation of this new king, the people sense there's an opportunity for change. There's trouble in the kingdom. There are rumblings of revolution. Enter another guy, different guy, similar name, a guy named Jeroboam. Rehoboam was Solomon's son. Jeroboam was Solomon's rival. See, some years before, Jeroboam had been exiled to Egypt by Solomon himself by trying to lead the very first rebellion, to bring change by force. And now looking to seize this as an opportunity, this changing of the guard as such, as an opportunity to alleviate this heavy burden of taxation, he now returns as the people's voice once more to see if Solomon's son could be convinced to take a different path of leadership than his father. And so they meet. A young, inexperienced king and his father's rival leading a social revolution. And his request, the request that he brings to Rehoboam, is quite simple. He simply wants to know, will you, as our new king, serve the people? He asks it this way. He says, your father put a heavy yoke on us, and here's what we wish. Just lighten the load a little bit. Lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke that he put on us, and we will serve you. Just lift the tax, and we will lift you on our shoulders. Rehoboam stands at a crossroads, the fate of his nation in the balance. How will he process this decision that is in front of him? How will he process all of the information now as this new king that he has to find his way through? Will he continue in the example of his father, heavily taxing the people to finance this extravagant lifestyle, the only lifestyle, by the way, that Rehoboam has ever known? Will he let the embers of revolution continue to burn? Or will he look upon the people with compassion? Will he look upon them in their distress with kindness and grace, and as uncertain as that path may seem to him, have the courage to carve a new way forward? It occurs to me that you and I may not be leading a nation or a corporation or even a division, but all of us stand at a crossroads like that from time to time. A crossroads where we have to filter through any number of breadth of information, and in the midst of it, search for wisdom. We, like Rehoboam, ask questions from time to time, like, what job should I take? Or which home should we purchase? Or what course of treatment should I pursue? Or how should I respond in the heat of this argument? Or how do I get a handle on my addiction? Just like Rehoboam, life challenges us with any number of crossroads, decisions, situations where we have to discern which path will we take. And when we do, how do we keep from, in the words of Solomon, how do we keep from losing our way? Jackie Robinson shared the story one time about when he first started playing baseball. The Dodgers were on the road in Cincinnati, and he was having a terrible game. He'd made a couple of errors on the field, and he could begin to hear the slurs that were coming from the grandstands. And in that moment, the story goes that Pee Wee played shortstop. He saw Jackie standing with his head down, and so he left his position, and he went over and he put his arm around Jackie's shoulder, and he talked with him for a bit. And again, from the grandstand, you could see that they were having a conversation, and then he patted him on the shoulder, and he went back to his position. As you know, Jackie Robinson was the sole African-American baseball player breaking the color barrier of the Major League Baseball in the 1940s. And this was a season of his life that was marked by the brutal injustices of racism. More than once, Jackie questioned if this was all worth it, if he truly belonged, if maybe it would be best if he just quit. And here in the middle of the inning, in a nondescript game in Cincinnati, a moment happened that transcended the cultural climate of the day and became a historic symbol of friendship, of teamwork, of courage. So much so that there's a statue in Brooklyn, New York, that has frozen that moment in time. Jackie later said of that moment that he shared in the infield with Pee Wee Reese, he said this, quote, that arm around my shoulder may have saved my career. Can I just ask you, maybe just a moment of assessment, just right where you're sitting right now at home, could you just ask yourself this question? Think for a moment, just call to mind, think about a decision that's facing you, a burden that you're carrying right now. Are you living right now in the isolated middle with that kind of homesteader sense of grit and self-reliance? Or are you living in the dependent corner of connection where human flourishing happens? Who do you sit with? Who do you listen with? Who do you weigh decisions with? Who has permission to speak into your life? Who's there to put their arm around you in the infield on your most discouraging and confusing day? See, when we think about this proverb, when we think about the story of Rehoboam, I think this is the first point of reflection for us to consider this morning. Who has permission to speak into my life? When I'm looking for wisdom, when I'm trying to discern the future, who has permission to speak into my life? There's a second reflection that's just as important. See, when you invite that person in, then we have to ask ourselves the question, what are they allowed to say? What are they allowed to say? Rehoboam answers the first reflection question well. When faced with his decision how to lead the nation, he invites a diversity of voices. There's wisdom in that, a diversity of voices into his life. But the second reflection question proved more difficult for him. I imagine that it does for us too. First, a word from the elder statesman. Rehoboam turns to his father's cabinet. He asks them, okay, this is a tough decision. Now, what advice do you have for me? And they gave him their advice out of the wisdom of their years of leading alongside his father, Solomon. They replied, if today you will be a servant to these people and serve them, just give them a favorable answer, Rehoboam. They will always be your servants. Just loosen the reins a little bit. Give some of your wealth back to the people. Give the people a break. Look upon them with compassion, and they will always be your servants. Do as they suggest, lift the taxes, and they will lift you on their shoulders. Second, he turns to the younger men who he had grown up with, this newly forming cabinet of friends. These were all of the lions of the establishment. These were the part of the elite. Their fathers were the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Treasury and the Chief of Staff. These were the friends that Rehoboam had come up with in all of the wealth and privilege of the palace. They'd been running together for years, and now they are excited to run the country together for years. And so he asked them, what do you think I should do? And they reply this. They say, tell the people who have said to you, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter. Tell them this, my little finger is thicker than your father's waist. My father laid a heavy yoke on you. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. Seems pretty rough from the young guys. But essentially they're saying, give in to their demands now, Rehoboam. Let them push you around today, Rehoboam, and they'll push you around forever. And immediately, two paths emerge. Lead with a servant's heart or with an iron fist. And Rehoboam thought it through, and after 3 days, he returned his answer to the people. And he answered them harshly. Rejecting the advice given to him by the elders, he followed the advice of the young men, increasing the burden of the people. And in an instant, the great nation that Abraham was promised The people that Moses and Joshua had led to the promised land, the nation that David slayed a giant to save, the nation that Solomon rose to greatness was shattered, divided in two. The 10 tribes of the north rallied under the leadership of Jeroboam, and the 2 kingdoms to the south endured the heavy hand of Rehoboam. The northern kingdom and the southern kingdom were established, and that conflict continues to exist in some part in that region today, in part because Rehoboam stood at a crossroads, and he looked around, and he chose the opinions of those who affirmed his own comfort and his own authority and his own security. Who's in your life that can speak into your life, and what are they allowed to say? Now, before we get too hard on Rehoboam here, let's be honest. You and I, we do this all the time. We have a political opinion, a relational challenge, a job-related decision to make, and we tend, don't we? We tend to call a friend or a colleague or a parent who we just have this sense, if I call, they're probably going to agree with what I already think and feel myself. And so really we're just calling to affirm our decision, to help them defend our comfort and our own privilege. It's what psychologists call a confirmation bias. It's when we interpret data in such a way to confirm a belief that we already hold. Chris Argus is a professor and a business theorist at Harvard Business School. And he's built this idea out further in a leadership theory that's called a ladder of inference. In it, Chris describes the thinking process that you and I, all of us, go through, usually without even realizing it, to get from a very neutral fact to an action. And he illustrates the steps that we move through as rungs on a ladder, moving from the bottom, a pool of knowledge, right? That's all the sort of nondescript facts that we interact with day to day, on up the ladder, rung to rung. We always start at the very bottom. We have a pool of reality and facts, largely just observable data that is neutral in nature. For example, an elderly man cuts you off in traffic. A coworker is late to a meeting. And we take that data, what we see in front of us, and our experience of it, and we store it away, and then we just allow that information to start shaping our beliefs. But then something happens again. A little old lady cuts you off in traffic again, only this time there's a bumper sticker. It says, I may be slow, but I'm ahead of you. Your coworker calls off early from work. And this additional data begins to reinforce your beliefs and strengthens how you see the world. And we just start slowly to move up the ladder. And as we do, our biases intensify, and we start adding qualifiers to our now forming worldview. We start to say things like, man, nobody knows how to drive in this city. Or you know what? I'm sick of this. Nobody works as hard as I do. And yet we know those things aren't true. We know that there are a number of situations, a number of other facts around whatever that experience was that we had that may adjust and reform what reality is in that moment. But that additional data just begins to reinforce our beliefs and strengthens how we see the world. And we start to move up that ladder. And as we do, our biases intensify. And now suddenly we're forming a worldview. And you know what? It happens to us all the time. Until eventually we're inside of a loop that we just don't know how to get out of. Until eventually we begin to act on those beliefs. And without realizing it, we can find ourselves inside that loop and find that it is very difficult to break. And this happens to us in our politics. It happens to us in our relationships. It happens to us in religion. But there is a way to change the cycle. But what it will require is a posture of humility, of giving people that you trust permission to speak into your life, to share from their experiences what they see from their vantage point, giving them permission to speak to you in that way. Because human flourishing comes through the shared experience of being connected to one another. You know, whenever someone asks me, what decision do you think I should make? I mean, what direction do you think I should go in? I always take time to ask them this question. Do you want my support or my opinion? I just take time to ask that question. It just creates just enough space for someone to really pause and consider, what is it that I'm actually asking you for? I mean, is your mind made up and you just need someone to come along and support you in the decision that you're about to make? Or are you sincerely looking for a trusted friend to help keep you from losing your way? Who has permission to speak into your life? What are they allowed to say? And then finally, just one more reflection question today. When you find yourself at a crossroads in life, could you just take time to ask yourself, have I sought the Lord? Have I sought the Lord? Have I taken all of the input that I've received? Surrounded myself by a diversity of wisdom? Have I given people permission to speak the truth in love to me? But then in a quiet moment of humble surrender, have I taken the time? Because I think too often we just move past this too quickly. Have I taken the time and the discipline to really lay this at the Lord's feet? This is Rehoboam's fatal flaw. The account shares that he took 3 days to make his decision. 3 days to discern the one thing that would define his leadership. 3 days that will shift the fate of the nation. But there is no indication that he brought this decision before the Lord. Never calls on a priest for support. Makes no visits to the temple for reflection. No journal entry laying his burden before God for divine intervention. And it just makes me think. It's hard for God to change the situation when you put your hands in your pockets and say, listen, I can handle this on my own. When you choose, by decision, to stay in the isolated middle of your homestead. Peter wrote and said, humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. This is the value of the ancient practice of silence and solitude, of creating some holy space in your life to allow your mind to be still and your soul to commune with God. David wrote in Psalm 131, I have stilled and quieted my soul. Have you humbled yourself to speak openly and honestly to the creator of the universe about what concerns you? See, because he promises that he will respond. Walter Wink was a theologian. He said history belongs to the intercessors. History does not belong to who we think it belongs to. It does not belong to the humanly powerful or the wealthy or the rulers or the armies or the corporations or the media empires. History belongs to those who humbly place themselves before God and reach their arms to heaven and trust God to meet them with power beyond themselves. King David, again, modeled this for his son Solomon and his grandson Rehoboam again and again and again in writing the Psalms. In Psalm 46, he said this, he said, be still, and know that I am God. That phrase, be still, means to vacate. It's where we get our English word vacation. Have you ever thought about prayer as a vacation? Just an opportunity to get away with God, to retreat into his presence and rest in his protection. See, when we create space for silence and solitude and prayer in our life, when there's a habit for that sort of thing in our life where we can lay our burdens at God's feet, we're invited to take a break and just let him be in charge. And in so doing, we acknowledge that this really is not about me. The decision that I'm facing is not about me. The burden that I'm carrying is not about me. I'm not the star of the show. I'm simply a much-loved small bit player in this grand epic story of God. I'm not the lead part. I'm not the name on the marquee. I'm not the director, the producer, the script writer. This is the epic story of God, and I'm simply invited to play a small part. Now, that part is a significant part. but it's just a small part. This life is about His greatness and His glory and His fame and His goodness and His plan. It's about His unfailing love for us. And prayer brings that back into focus. It helps us to get honest about who we are and who God is. James, Jesus' brother, said, if you lack wisdom, you ought to pray. If you're sick, you ought to pray. If you're going through a tough time, you ought to pray. Just open your hands to heaven and say, here I am, Lord. Here's all of me. Not what ought to be in me, as C.S. Lewis suggested, but what's actually in me. All of my fears and my temptations and my failures and all. Here's the burden that I carry, the decision that I'm facing, the situation, the crossroads that I have to navigate. Now, Lord, what would you have me to do? And then trust that the maker of heaven and earth will guide your steps, that He will show you the way. When I was growing up, and I'll close with this, when I was growing up, my dad and I loved to go on trips together. And he'd toss me an atlas. Remember that? We had big old atlases. Remember those days? He'd toss me an atlas in the front seat, and he'd say, okay, buddy, get us to where we're going. And I would sit with that atlas, and I would mark out our course and measure the distance and call out directions as we drove together. But inevitably, I would make a mistake. I'd take us down the wrong exit or miscalculate the mileage. And when I did, you know what my dad would say to me? He'd look over at me and he'd say, no problem, buddy. There's always another way. We'll find it together. Today, I toss my son an iPhone, and he pulls up Google Maps, and there's no more measuring, no more calculating, no more mistakes. You just sort of plug your destination in and then listen to the lady's voice in the box tell you which way to turn. And it dawns on me, you can have the lady in the car, but it doesn't mean that you have to trust her. I mean, you go where she tells you to go. And if you trust her, what do? You do whatever she says to do, right? She says turn left, you turn left. But on occasion, I've been known to think that the lady is wrong. She may say go left, but I don't go left. I turn right because I know she's wrong. And when you do this, if you ever do this, there is always an interesting response. She'll say, recalculating. When it's safe to do so, execute a U-turn. But I know she's wrong. So when it is safe to do so, I don't execute a U-turn. I unplug her. The beauty about the lady in the box is that you can always unplug her. You'll get lost as a goose if you do, and your son will begin to pester you with questions. Why didn't you turn, Dad? We're going the wrong way, Dad. Dad, you got to go back the opposite direction, Dad. And eventually, you'll get humble enough to plug the lady back in. And when you do you know what she'll say? I told you so, you little idiot. Oh, now you think I'm going to help you. You rejected me. You just try to find your way home by yourself. No, she won't say that. She'll say, recalculating route. When safe to do so, execute a U-turn. It's the voice of your heavenly Father saying, no problem, buddy. There's always another way. We'll find it together. Now, you see, that's grace. As soon as you're ready to listen, as soon as you're ready to carve out space to lay your burden before God, God will say, no problem. Let's find our way through this together. It's the essence of Jesus. He is the only one with the authoritative wisdom to teach us how to live, to show us which direction to go, if we choose to trust Him and lay our plans before Him and know that He will guide our steps. Reflect on it together one last time, these beautiful words in the Proverbs from Solomon to his son Rehoboam. Without good direction, people lose their way. But the more wise counsel you follow, the better are your chances the more likely you are to experience human flourishing. Would you do this with me? Would you just bow your head for a moment, right where you are, in your living room or with your smartphone, wherever you're listening from right now? Just bow your head for a moment. And if you would, just turn your palms up on your lap. Just a small, simple gesture to acknowledge your openness to God's presence. And for a moment, just this moment, would you just call a decision that you have to make into your mind? Maybe a burden that you're carrying today. Maybe it's something in your home, something at work, some habit or hang up that just keeps tripping you up in your life. And would you just hold that in your heart for a moment? And maybe just join me in saying these words, Jesus, here we are, right now, here I am, entirely and completely yours. Jesus, I carry this burden before you, and I confess to you that too often I attempt to solve it on my own in the isolated middle of my own homestead. But I know what it is to flourish. And I recognize, God, that you've given me the gift of others, of people in my life who can move with me through challenges. And so I open myself up to a voice of wisdom, to many counselors that grace my life. And I pray now, Jesus, that you would give me the courage to listen, open and honestly. Help me, Jesus, to break any feedback loop that just sort of try to confirm things I already believe, trap me into hearing what only affirms my own comfort and security. And Jesus, I come to you as my leader and my Lord, the author of life itself. And I lay this in your hands. I lay it at your feet. I invite you to act as only you can do, trusting that you will order my steps. It's in Christ's name that I pray. Amen.
This time we're going to move into a time of communion. We celebrate this meal week after week because God knew we would forget. I can't tell you how many reminders I need of things that he's taught me. I'm so grateful for this reminder week after week, and you could do it daily. Just the sacrifice Jesus made for us. The night he was betrayed, he took bread and he broke it. He said, "This is my body broken for you." And he took the juice, the wine. He said, "This is my blood poured out for the forgiveness of sins." And the disciples and Jesus shared this meal. And he said, "When you do this, do it in remembrance of me." So before you take communion, we're going to try a new song that Justin introduced to us a couple months ago. So I'm going to allow you to take communion at your home. And then we're going to go into a new song that it's my prayer that it would be a song that we can cling to in this time. Cling to Jesus. So go ahead and take communion. There's grace when the heart is under fire. Another way when the walls are closing in. When I think of the space between where I used to be and this reckoning, another in the fire, standing next to me. There was another in the waters, holding back the seas. Should I ever need reminding of how I've been set free, there is a cross that bears my burden, but another died for me. There is another in the fire. All my death left for dead beneath the waters. I'm no longer a slave to my sin anymore. Should I fall in the space between what remains of me and this reckoning? Either way, I will bow to the things of this world. I know I'll never be alone. There is another in the fire, standing next to me. There is another in the waters, holding back the seas. Should I ever need reminding what power lives in me? There is a grave that holds nobody. Now the power lives in me. There is another in the fire. Oh, there is another in the fire. Oh, there's another in the fire. Oh, there's another in the fire. Oh, I can see the light in the darkness as the darkness bows to him. I can hear the roar in the heavens as the space between waves thin. I can feel the ground shake beneath us as the prison walls cave in. Nothing stands between us. Nothing stands between us. There is no other name but the name of Jesus. He who was and still is and will be through it all. So come with me in the space between all the things unseen and his reckoning. I know I'll never be alone. I know I'll never be alone. Be another in the fire, standing next to me. Be another in the waters, holding back the seas. Should I ever need reminding count the joy come every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be.
Hi, I'm Emily Podlesnik, the administrative assistant here at Bellevue Christian Church. We're a church where ordinary people are learning to live everyday life like Jesus, all because of what Jesus has done for us. We want to thank Josh Pay for being here this morning, and we're so glad you decided to join us online as well. If you haven't already, we'd love for you to subscribe to our weekly email over at our page at bellevuechristian.church. That's the best way to stay up to date with all the changes and updates that'll be coming in the next coming weeks and months. If you're in need of care right now, please feel free to reach out to our care team with an email at care@bellevuechristian.church, and one of our team members will follow up with you. To give to BCC, you can go online at bellevuechristian.church/give, or you can send in your payment to the address that is at the bottom of our website page. We don't have any updates on reopening this week, but all the recent updates on COVID-19 can be found at bellevuechristian.church/coronavirus. A quick update on the Bless Our Boroughs campaign this week. The Borough Business Angels initiative is moving forward by actually blessing Joe's Rusty Nail, which is in Bellevue. The restaurant has agreed to cater a meal for the Bellevue Fires Department on August 5th. The Rusty Nail has been awesome and doing a great job blessing North Hills Community Outreach and Light of Life, and we want to make sure that they can continue to do things like that. Impulse will continue to meet online at 7 to 8:30 on Tuesdays. If you have any questions, you can email Isaac Ames at isaac@bellevuechristian.church. Virtual VBS is coming up in a couple weeks. It will start Monday, August 10th, and run through Friday, August 14th. It will be from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. online. And this is a completely free event for kids 3 through 6th grade, and is a great way for kids and families to learn about Jesus in our community. Registration can be found online at bellevuechristian.church/VBS, and we're super excited to see you virtually. And lastly is an exciting announcement about the new platform that we will be using for our 11 a.m. services on Sunday. So starting next Sunday, August 9th, we will be switching our 11 a.m. service from YouTube to a platform called Church Online. This new platform is extremely user-friendly and will allow our church a more interactive experience on Sunday mornings. This new platform allows us to watch the sermon, chat with others, give online, and eventually pray with our prayer partners all in one spot, which is awesome. We've had a couple test runs and have gotten great results and feedback, and we're super excited to launch it next Sunday with all of you as well. To make this new platform easily accessible, we will have the new link and directions for how to use Church Online platform in our weekly email that we send out on Fridays. It will also be available on the front page of our website at bellevuechristian.church. Our kids' lesson will not be switching to Church Online platform and will remain on YouTube. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at emily@bellevuechristian.church. Let me close now with the Great Commission. Jesus says, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age."